watching me on YouTube? Good. I'd like to play a game with you.
Alright everybody, I know I've been gone for a while, but I'm back now, so welcome back to the channel. And if you're watching one of my videos for the first time, I gotta let you know that this is one of my most insane ideas yet, but I said I was gonna give an explanation to every horror movie character, so here we are. Now when you hear the name Jigsaw, what's the first thing you think of? Now what's the last thing you think of? John Kramer, right? And even though he's supposed to be the antagonist of these movies, to me he never really felt like he was the real villain. Now, here's the great thing about this idea. I'm not gonna get into all the nuances of the story because these movies start to get too complicated after the third one, and the only reason we kept going to see them every year is because we wanted to see some new death traps. And if you've seen one Saw movie, you've basically seen them all. They're suspense, crime thriller, and torture porn, I guess. They're kinda like Seven, Hostel, Silence of the Lambs, and a little bit of Hellraiser all in one. And even though Saw isn't the first movie in the splatter film subgenre, it's easily the most popular and the most successful. If you haven't seen a Saw movie before, or it's been a really long time since you've seen one, here's the 30-second synopsis of the entire series. A civil engineer named John finds out that he has terminal cancer, and shortly after his unborn child is killed, he tries to commit suicide. But he survives, and he decides to create death traps where the only escape is self-mutilation. He believes that you can only appreciate life if you're able to overcome trauma and suffering. He has several secret apprentices that help with the kidnapping and setup of the traps, and every character in this movie is connected somehow. This guy sold this guy a motorcycle that killed this guy's kid, and he arrested her son and stole her purse, and it's like there's only 50 people in this entire city. Kramer dies at the end of the third movie, but we find out that several of his apprentices have taken the role of the Jigsaw killer to continue his work. So that's the basic story: death traps and secret apprentices. But John Kramer's motivation never made any sense to me. He wants criminals to appreciate their lives, but are these really the worst crimes in the city? And why is it worth spending all this time, money, and effort for 90% of the people to just die anyway? The easy answer could be that he wants to punish sinners and prove a point like John Doe from Seven. He could even be a member of the elite hunting club from Hostel that just enjoys seeing people suffer. But what if there was a supernatural element to these movies that everyone completely missed? The first Saw movie was more of a crime thriller than a horror movie, and for better or worse, the sequels pushed it over the line into being legit horror. I was happy to see a new Saw movie every year, well, until the fourth one. John Kramer was dead, but somehow the Jigsaw killer was still very active. They tried to explain it all by introducing us to a string of secret apprentices that all seemed to be just as genius as Kramer, even though none of them were as intelligent, cunning, or dedicated to the idea as he was. Now, I'm no expert in engineering, but I'm sure that the level of skill required to make these sort of traps is pretty high. So I gotta ask, where is everyone getting this knowledge from? And considering that John is a civil engineer and not a mechanical engineer, I'm wondering how he was able to make such elaborate traps with so many complicated moving parts, and he was also able to teach this to other people when this is not even his expertise. Civil engineers design bridges and highways, and mechanical engineers would design elevators or generators. You know, machines. It's like comparing building a house to building a car. It's a very different skill set. So I went back to the first movie and I asked myself, what if John wasn't the real Jigsaw killer either? What if he was just an apprentice himself? Each movie seemed to get more and more ridiculous with all the secret apprentices and motivations, but one character remained at the center of everything. Billy is the only character that appears in every movie, and yet no one pays attention to him because he's just a puppet. But is he really the puppet master? Now, I know it's kind of wild to consider that Billy is in control and Kramer is just one of his many apprentices, but just look at how the movies play out. In Saw 1, Kramer is laying on the ground the whole time, while another person runs around and makes sure the plan stays on track. In parts 2 and 3, Kramer is near death and he can barely stand, while, once again, someone else runs around and makes sure this complicated plan stays on track. Then after part 3, Kramer is dead, and yet it's still his voice on the recordings, and someone is still skilled enough to build elaborate Rube Goldberg death traps. But then we see the puppet that seems like it's alive. The eyes move, the head turns, it responds to the environment, and it can even ride a tricycle with no visible motor. And before you completely dismiss this idea, just answer this one question. Why would a puppet back up to get away from the electricity? Or why would someone take the time to program Billy to move his eyes when he's talking to different people? And Billy's always at the center of everything, keeping an eye on the participants of the games. Now there's many different ways we can approach this idea. Is Kramer transferring his consciousness into Billy Chucky style, and this is why he's always unconscious when the death games are going on? Is Billy really a Cenobite, trying to help Kramer resurrect his son in a blood ritual like the mattress from Hellraiser 2? And I can't show you this because it's one of the most gruesome scenes ever in a movie, but let's just have a listen.
Get him off me!
Is Billy a living doll like Pinocchio, created by a puppet master ritual where Kramer is basically Geppetto, and every time someone dies inside of one of his traps, he gets closer to becoming a real boy? Just look at how primitive the early puppet designs were in the movie. Even though in the short film that came out a year before the first Saw was released,
Congratulations.
so Billy's design was already complete before the first movie came out. But his appearance changes with each movie and he looks more and more like a real boy. I told you this was a wild idea. But if I had to pick one explanation, I think the answers can be found in a really terrible movie. I was one of the few people that actually liked The Boy, but when the second one came out, I really didn't understand how they made the jump from a man living in the wall to a demon that forces people to do his bidding. The one question that never gets answered in the movies is, why did Brahms kill the little girl in the first place? And why was this one act so irredeemable that the family had to force a 5-year-old kid to start living in the walls? Well, part 2 takes that one little question and they made an entire movie out of it. And when we finally get the answer, I couldn't help but notice that it lined up pretty perfectly with Kramer and Billy.
Tell me where he is.
He's in a safe place.
Is Jude okay?
Don't worry. He's safe. He calls me. He calls out to the ones that need him. The damaged ones. He looks inside you. It was just a whisper. At first. Then the voice said to put him back together. So I did.
Kramer was weak and broken, and after his suicide attempt, he started to hear a voice in his head. So he built the doll, and he built the death traps to appease him. But once Kramer was dead, Billy just moved on to the next person. A person that was just as weak and just as broken. And even though we're told that the purpose of the traps is to make people stronger, the real purpose of the traps is to break people down, making them emotionally weak and easier for Billy to invade their minds. Kramer said he wanted to teach people to appreciate life, even though almost everyone dies, and even the people who do survive don't seem to be any better than before they made it past his tests. The only person that benefits from these traps is Billy, a demon doll that feeds on the suffering of others. This one was really difficult for me to make because there was so many movies to watch and only small parts of each movie gave me anything to really work with. So I ended up watching the Chucky movies and Puppet Master movies, and that led me to even watching Pinocchio. And at first I was going to match up the parallels with Pinocchio, but that's a really complicated story and the Saw movies got too stupid after the fourth one to really make any comparisons. These movies pretend to be smart, but the entire premise is flawed because nobody's motivations really make any sense, and they're just kind of cheap popcorn movies, kind of like Paranormal Activity.